Hebrew uses the Hebrew alphabet with optional vowel points. The Romanization of Hebrew is the use of the Latin alphabet to transliterate Hebrew words. For example, the Hebrew name spelled in the Hebrew alphabet can be romanized as Yisrael or Yiśrā'ēl in the Latin alphabet. Romanization includes any use of the Latin alphabet to transliterate Hebrew words. Usually it is to identify a Hebrew word in a non-Hebrew language that uses the Latin alphabet, such as German, Spanish, Turkish, and so on. Transliteration uses an alphabet to represent the letters and sounds of a word spelled in another alphabet, whereas transcription uses an alphabet to represent the sounds only. Romanization can do both. To go the other way, that is from English to Hebrew, see Hebraization of English. Both Hebraization of English and Romanization of Hebrew are forms of transliteration. Where these are formalized, these are known as transliteration systems, and where only some words, not all, are transliterated, this is known as transliteration policy. Transliteration. When to transliterate, transliteration assumes two different script systems. The use of a French word in English without translation, such as bourgeois, is not transliteration. The use of a Hindi word in English such as khaki is transliteration. Transliteration of a foreign word into another language is usually the exception to translation, and often occurs when there is something distinctive about the word in the original language, such as a double entendre, uniqueness, religious, cultural or political significance, or it may occur to add local flavor. In the cases of Hebrew transliteration into English, many Hebrew words have a long history of transliteration. For example, Amen, Satan, Ephod, Urim and Thummim have traditionally been transliterated, not translated. These terms were in many cases also first transliterated into Greek and Latin before English. Different publishers have different transliteration policies. For example, Art Scroll publications generally transliterate more words relative to sources such as the Jewish Encyclopedia 1911, or Jewish Publication Society texts. How to transliterate. There are various transliteration standards or systems for Hebrew to English. No one system has significant common usage across all fields. Consequently, in general usage, there are often no hard and fast rules in Hebrew to English transliteration, and many transliterations are an approximation due to lack of equivalence between the English and Hebrew alphabets. Conflicting systems of transliteration often appear in the same text, as certain Hebrew words tend to associate with certain traditions of transliteration. For example, for Hanukkah at the synagogue Beth She'eshaim, Isaac donned his talis that Yitzchak sent him from Bet Kahila in Tsfat, Israel. This text includes instances of the same word transliterated in different ways. The Hebrew word is transliterated as both Beth and Bet, and the Hebrew name is transliterated as both Isaac and Yitzchak. These discrepancies in transliterations of the same word can be traced to discrepancies in the transliterations of individual Hebrew letters, reflecting not only different traditions of transliteration into different languages that use Latin alphabets, but also the fact that different pronunciation styles exist for the same letters in Israel. For example, Hanukkah and Chaim are transliterated with different initial letter combinations. Although in Hebrew both begin with the letter, the use of ch reflects German, Yiddish influence and pronunciation, whereas the h or h may indicate a softer pronunciation of as in Ancient Hebrew, Judeo-Arabic and Mizrahi Hebrew. Similarly, the Hebrew letter is transliterated as th in the word Beth, s in the word talis, and t in the word bet, even though it is the same letter in all three words in Hebrew. The Hebrew letter is transliterated as C in Isaac, K in Yitzchak, and Q in Kephila. Finally, the Hebrew letter is transliterated variously as S, TZ, and TS, again reflecting different traditions of pronunciation. These inconsistencies make it impossible for the non-Hebrew speaking reader to recognize related word forms, or even to properly pronounce the Hebrew words thus transliterated. Historic instances. Early Romanization of Hebrew occurred with a contact between the Romans and the Jews. It was influenced by earlier transliteration into the Greek language. For example, the name of the Roman province of Judea was apparently derived from the Greek words omicron upsilon delta alpha and omicron upsilon delta alpha iota alpha. These words can be seen in chapter 1 of Esdras in the Septuagint, a Hellenistic translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. The Greek words in turn are transliterations of the Hebrew word that we now know adapted in English as the names Judah, Judas and Jude. In the 1st century, Satire 14 of Juvenal uses the Hebraic words Sabbata, Iudaicum, and Moises, apparently adopted from the Greek. The 4th century and 5th century Latin translations of the Hebrew Bible romanize its proper names. The familiar biblical names in English are derived from these romanizations. The Vulgate of the early 5th century is considered the first direct Latin translation of the Hebrew Bible. Apart from names, another term that the Vulgate romanizes is the technical term mamzer. With the rise of Zionism, some Jews promoted the use of romanization instead of Hebrew script in hopes of helping more people learn Hebrew. One such promoter was Ithamar ben Yehuda, or Itamar ben Avi as he styled himself. His father Eliezer ben Yehuda raised him to be the first modern native speaker of Hebrew. In 1927 Ben Avi published the biography Avi in Romanized Hebrew. However, the innovation did not catch on. Political activist Zev Jabotinsky, leader of Beta, and Chief Rabbi Kook, also expressed the support for the reform of Hebrew script using Latin letters. Modern uses. Romanized Hebrew can be used to present Hebrew terminology or text to anyone who is not familiar with the Hebrew script. Many Jewish prayer books include supplementary romanization for some or all of the Hebrew language congregational prayers. Romanized Hebrew is also used for Hebrew language items in library catalogs and Hebrew language place names on maps. In Israel, most catalogs and maps use the Hebrew script, but Romanized maps are easily available and road signs include Romanized names. Some Hebrew speakers use romanization to communicate when using internet systems that have poor support for the Hebrew alphabet. Standard romanizations exist for these various purposes. However, non-standard romanization is widely seen, even on some Israeli street signs. The standards are not generally taught outside of the specific organizations and disciplines. Standards. Traditional, scholarly, ISO 259 to 1984, ISO 259-2 to 1994, Society of Biblical Literature Handbook of Style, National Rules of Transcription, Romanization of Hebrew, Academy of the Hebrew Language, 1957. Updated and augmented with a simplified version, 2000. Replaced by a new system altogether in 2006. ArtScroll #ArtScroll Transliteration Policy and Transliteration System. Bibliographic data. ANSI Z39.25-1975. ALA LC Romanization Tables and the Book Hebraica Cataloging, with Encyclopedia Judaica as an authority on names and common terms. Library of Congress Authorities is an online database that records and sources the forms of subjects' names, and titles that the library Library of Congress uses geographic names, BGN, PCGN 1962, approximately equivalent to UNGEGN 1977, as both are based on the Academy of the Hebrew Language recommendations. However, BGN provides more and somewhat different specific recommendations. The GeoNet Name Server is an authoritative online database that lists BGN names and assists with font character availability and conventional forms of names. Phonemic ISO FDIS 259-3 to 1999. Comparative Table. The following table is a breakdown of each letter in the Hebrew alphabet, describing its name and names, and its Latin script transliteration values used in academic work. If two glyphs are shown for a consonant, then the leftmost glyph is the final form of the letter. The conventions here are ISO 259, the UNGEGN system based on the old-fashioned Hebrew Academy system, and the modern common informal Israeli transcription. In addition, an international phonetic alphabet pronunciation is indicated, historical for ISO 259, prescribed for Hebrew Academy, and in practice for Israeli. For the vowels further down, the letters are used as symbolic anchors for vowel symbols, but should otherwise be ignored. For the letters with dagesh in ISO 259 Classical Hebrew and by the Hebrew Academy standard, they are transcribed as single graphemes at the beginnings of words, after other consonants, and after Yiśrā'ēl. In almost every other situation, they are transcribed as double letters. This does not apply to common Israeli Hebrew transliteration, where there are no double consonants. The letters at the ends of words without additional nakud are silent and not transliterated. The letter at the end of a word with holum is also silent and not transliterated. The letter at the end of a word after hirik is also silent and not transliterated. The situation of the letter at the end of a word after Yiśrā'ēl is more complicated, as they are silent in Classical Hebrew and in Hebrew Academy prescription and not transliterated in those systems, but they form diphthongs in Israeli Hebrews. See the vowels and diphthongs sections further down. In any event, the shawana is placed between two adjacent consonants in all situations. If there is not even a shawana between consonants, then the first of the two consonants is silent and not transliterated. This is usually one of, but even occasionally and rarely are encountered silent in this fashion. In Israeli Hebrew transcription, a vowel before yud at the end of a word or before yud then shawana are inside a word, is transcribed as a diphthong. See the diphthongs section further down. In Classical Hebrew transliteration, vowels can be long, short or ultra-short, and are transliterated as such. Ultra-short vowels are always one of suana, hartep segel, hartep pata, or hartep quoms. Su is always suana if it's immediately after the word's first consonant, or after a consonant after a long vowel and before another pronounced consonant. Otherwise, su is realized as suana. The vowels sia and holum are always long in all situations. The vowels hayek, segel, pata, quoms, kibis and shurik are always long if they have the stress syllable, or if they are in a syllable before only one consonant and another vowel, and in these cases they are transliterated as long. If they are unstressed and before a double consonant or a consonant cluster, or in the word's final unstressed syllable, then they are always short and transliterated as short. But if a vowel carries an accent or a metek, then it is always long. A metag in particular is often used in places where a vowel is long but not necessarily the word's stress syllable. Lastly, there are exceptional circumstances when long vowels, even sia and holum, may not force the following suet to become suana, including for example names such as Gershom, Belsasser and Siklag. Some of these seem to be learned exceptions, and most words under the same circumstances have suana as expected, such as Nazarat. For the vowel kamaz, whether the vowel is long or short in classical Hebrew affects the pronunciation in Academy or Israeli Hebrew, even though vowel length is not phonemic in those systems, and a difference is transliterated accordingly. Kamaz katan when short is o, except when at the end of a word when not before a final consonant, in which case it is a. Kamaz gadol is usually a, but in rare situations in classical Hebrew it can be treated as a long open o, which, although pronounced identically to a, this a-o distinction is clearly made in the pronunciation of Academy and Israeli Hebrew, and is thus transliterated. If any word ends with one of, then the vowel pater is pronounced before the consonant, not after as it is written, and so the transliterated sequences are a, etc. In certain rare words that are meant to begin with two consecutive consonants, even in classical Hebrew, an invisible segel katan vowel is pronounced before the two consonants in classical Hebrew and is transcribed, because classical words may not begin with more than one consonant. This rule does not apply to Academy and Israeli Hebrews, where consonant clusters are more tolerated. For example, the word would appear as steim, but is actually asteim. However, it remains simply shtam in Academy and Israeli Hebrew. In 2006, the Hebrew Academy replaced the 1953 transliteration rules with new rules, and these were adopted as a United Nations standard in 2007. As of 2008, migration to the new transliteration standard is still underway, and many signs and documents still use the 1953 conventions. The new 2006 rules attempt to more closely follow Israeli Hebrew vowel habits, but stop short of adopting most of the informal transliteration patterns. It still transliterates the diphthong as e, and it still transliterates separate para and kh in all cases. It is unspecific about rules governing the transliteration of phonemes not traditionally native to Hebrew. Table notes transcription versus transliteration. Different purposes call for different choices of romanization. One extreme is to make a phonetic transcription of one person's speech on one occasion. In Israel, a pronunciation known as General Israeli Hebrew as Standard Hebrew is widely used and documented. For Israeli speech and text where linguistic groups are not at issue, romanization can use a phonetic transcription according to Standard Hebrew pronunciation. However, there are many Israeli groups with differing pronunciations of Hebrew and differing social priorities. An attempt to devise a more general system of romanization is complicated by the long and varied history of the Hebrew language. Most Hebrew texts can be appropriately pronounced according to several different systems of pronunciation, both traditional and modern. Even today, it is customary to write Hebrew using only consonants and matters lectionized. There was no way to indicate vowels clearly in Hebrew writing until the time of the Second Temple. Since an earlier time, multiple geographically separated communities have used Hebrew as a language of literature rather than conversation. One system of assigning and indicating pronunciation in Hebrew, the Iberians vocalization, is broadly authoritative for Hebrew texts since the end of the Second Temple period. It is possible to accommodate the pronunciations of different communities by transliterating the Tiberians vocalization without attempting to transcribed a specific phonetic pronunciation. Notable varieties of Hebrew for which Iberian's vocalization is not suitable of the Hebrew of the Qumran community and of the Samaritans. For romanizations of Samaritan pronunciation, it is advisable to take quotations directly from a Samaritan edition of the Hebrew Bible, which has approximately 6,000 textual variations from Jewish editions. It is appropriate to focus only on the consonantal spelling when discussing unusually structured words from ancient or medieval works. Use of Iberian's principles. The Iberian's vocalization was devised in order to add indications of pronunciation to the consonantal text of the Hebrew Bible, without changing the consonantal text. It was intended for experts in biblical Hebrew grammar and morphology. Transliterations usually avoid the typographically complex marks that are used in Iberian's vocalization. They also attempt to indicate vowels and syllables more explicitly than Iberian's vocalization does. Therefore, technical transliteration requires the use of Iberian's principles, as mentioned below, rather than simply representing the Iberian symbols. Many transliteration standards require a thorough knowledge of these principles, yet they usually do not provide practical details. Vowels. There are 7 basic vowels. A vowel may be long, short, or ultra-short. The vowel shva may be sounded as silent. Consonants that have been used historically to indicate vowels, the matters lectionized, are no substitute for proper vowel marks. The vowel kmes may have its usual sound or a different sound. Consonants. 6 consonants can be hard or soft. To be specific, they are pronounced either as stops or fricatives. For example, the letter bet can be pronounced as b or v. Iberian's vocalization marks a hard consonant with a dagesh kalaline. A soft consonant lacks a dagesh kal, and is sometimes explicitly marked using raf, an overbar. Transliterations sometimes also use an overbar or underbar to mark a soft consonant. A letter that looks like shin may be that let or the let of sin. Most consonants can undergo gemination. Iberian's vocalization marks gemination with a dagesh hazaga forte, which looks the same as dagesh kal. A consonant that is normally silent may be sounded if it is a root consonant or possessive ending. Iberian's vocalization marks such a consonant using a mapik, which looks like a dagesh. A silent vav may be used to hold a holam vowel, but sometimes a vav with holam has consonant value. Additional transliteration principles. A further complication is that the Roman alphabet does not have as many letters for certain sounds found in the Hebrew alphabet, and sometimes no letter at all. Some romanizations resolve this problem using additional non-Iberian principles. The 2 letters that represent a stop may be written using the forward and backward quote marks or similar marks. Certain consonants are considered emphatic due to being pronounced traditionally toward the back of the mouth. They may be transliterated distinctively by using an underdot. The letter vav was once pronounced like English W, in contrast to its current pronunciation identical to the letter vet. The Carmelite transcription creates additional letters based on similar Hebrew as Cyrillic letters to represent the sounds which lack Roman letters. Finally, for ease of reading, it is common to apply certain principles foreign to Hebrew. Use a hyphen between common prefixes or suffixes and a romanized word. Capitalize the first letter of a proper name, but not its prefixes.